Hello, it's Moira here, and in this video we're going to learn how to work a front flat slip stitch join. These are the first two squares that I'm going to join with my front flat slip stitch. To start, I'm going to make a slip knot and pop it on my hook. It's very important that our working yarn should be at the back of the squares that we want to join. So you can see that that's why I'm putting it in the middle of the squares at the moment. I'm now going to pick up the opposite corner chains from both squares, and I'm going through from the front to the back on both squares. So front to back on the first square and front to back on the second square. It's a bit awkward, the second square, because it's upside down. And now we've got 3 loops on our hook. So we're making a slip stitch, remember, so it's just wrap the yarn round and pull through all 3 stitches. Make sure your yarn goes to the back, and then you're picking up the top loop of the next stitch, working front to back, and the top loop of the next stitch of the other square, working front to back. Yarn over and pull through. And we're going to continue with this, putting our yarn to the back, picking up the top loop of the next stitch on the first square and the next stitch on the second square, always the top loops and always working front to back. Then we can wrap our yarn round once we have our 3 loops and pull through, and we can see already we've got a nice flat slip stitch joining both of those squares. I'm going to continue joining both of these squares with my flat slip stitch, and when I get closer to the end of the square, I'm going to show you how to join the next 2 squares. I'm just about at the end of these 2 squares, the join for these 2 squares, so I'm just working these last few stitches. I'm now back to the corner chains. Make sure that it's the first corner chain you're picking up, because remember you've got 2 chains at each corner. And once we've got our corner chains picked up, we're now ready to yarn over and pull the yarn through all 3 stitches. And that's our 2 squares joined with a really nice flat slip stitch join. It doesn't add any depth to the join at all. Here's the next 2 squares that we want to add, and we're going to carry on as we did with the first 2 squares. We want to pick up that corner chains. Working identically to the first 2 squares, working from the front to the back and making sure you pick up the correct corner chain. Remember, there's 2 corner chains, so you're wanting to pick up the leftmost corner chain, and we just then carry on working as we did with the first 2 squares. Yarn to the back, pick up the top loop of our first square and then the top loop of our second square. And once we've got our 3 loops on our hook, we can yarn over and pull through to create that slip stitch. I'll work another few stitches so that I can then demonstrate how we work a neat stitch across that slip stitch that's joining all 4 corners. I've already worked a few stitches and I'm now ready to actually work towards that joining of all 4 corners. My yarn, my working yarn, is behind. You can see it's actually underneath those chains that I've already created. So I'm working in the top loop as before, and you can see that I actually wrap the yarn still around my fingers because I do want to actually create a nice tension, and to enable me to do that I tend to work over the working yarn in that middle stitch. So you can see that I'm picking up the loop, working over the yarn, and then picking up the next loop and then pulling through as normal. It does become a little bit awkward actually working with the yarn as we get a little bit closer to where the join is, because you don't have much space. So do just take care when you're working here that you actually are going into the right stitches. I'm now back to my corner chains. I've got one stitch, which is my corner chain, on both of those squares. So picking up the corner chain from both squares, again the opposing corner chain, is a little bit awkward, as I've already said. And then I've got to find my working yarn, and this time I'm still going through from the back. You can see I've pulled it through that way and pulling through all 3 loops. Once all 3 loops have actually been pulled through, I now want to create a stitch to go across, to actually jump across there. So I'm just creating a complete slip stitch, and I'm making it out not too tight because I do want to cross there. There we go, I've actually created that slip stitch to cross where I've already worked. And then we're looking to pick up the corner chain, the correct corner chain, remember. We've already picked up one corner chain, so we're looking to pick up the second corner chain of the next 2 squares. So we'll look for the second corner chain, pick up the loops, and then pull through. And then we're going to carry on as we have been, finding the top loop of the next stitch of the bottom square and the top loop of the next stitch of the top square. Pull our yarn through to create our slip stitch. And there we can now see that we've got a nice slip stitch jumping across and making a nice cross where we actually join all 4 corners of our squares. I'm sure you'll agree with me that this join is a great addition to your crochet stitch toolbox. I'm going to be using it to add a contrast colour to my latest design, Arabella. If you have found this video useful, please do hit the like button and follow me on YouTube. If you want to know more about my mosaic crochet patterns, you can find them in Daisyknots web shop or Daisyknots Ravelry Store. Thank you.